His breath caught in his throat as he heard another growl coming from behind him. He was well aware that there was no way out of this situation. We are transported to the Arctic Circle and its icy seas in today's story. All around it, the world remains frozen, a never-ending shade of dark blue. At its core, the ice is colder, and a chill wind makes the ice particles twirl like tiny fireflies. Then there's the ice beast, an incredibly stealthy creature that makes its home here. Stuart Caldwell, a geographer, set out to explore the Icelands on a beautiful early day. He wore a white head warmer and was fully covered in white fur. Wearing protective goggles, he flexed his fingers while his white gloves kept them warm. Stepping forward into the snow, he started to make his way onto the ice, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He could cautiously find his way here without much assistance, since he was familiar with the areas where the ice was thicker than normal. As he moved through the dense snow and ice, the wind pushed him back and forth. The snow would fall in huge flakes in some areas and barely a dusting in others. Nothing could provide cover from the relentless winds, not even trees or bushes. The wind was so strong that it seemed as though the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving everything below freezing. Without any trouble at all, Stuart traversed the icy terrain. On occasion, Stuart would lose his footing due to a gust of wind, but he always recovered quickly. His sole concern was the possibility of a fatal fall onto an iceberg caused by a single slip-up. But he refused to look back, instead maintaining a fixed focus on the road ahead. He eventually came to a stop in front of a massive block of ice. It seemed to him that this was the spot where the ice got denser. With great caution, Stuart climbed the slick ice, falling more than once on the way up. Taking stock of his surroundings, he studied the terrain. Much of the water around the ice's perimeter was solidly frozen, providing an ideal passageway between the shoreline and the ice field. But there was very little snowmelt flowing off the ice's edge. Stuart glanced down at his surroundings once he reached the top of the ice mound. It appeared to him that he was approximately halfway up the mound. On the other side, there was a cliff with a gentle incline that descended into an ocean of black, jagged pebbles. There was a little ice lake across the water. He reasoned that the water flowing through the landscape must have its source in the lake. The landscape appeared nearly desolate, with only the occasional rock formation serving to break up the vastness. Not a single tree could be seen. His breath was literally taken away by the view. He could have enjoyed the view more quietly if he hadn't been clad in all that bulk. Stuart hurriedly jumped over the edge of the ice and began his descent because he was too excited to fully appreciate what he was seeing. From behind, there was a resounding cracking noise. Incredulous, he spun around to see a mountain of ice crashing onto the frozen landscape. The perils of the Arctic, which Stuart was aware of, ranged from walking on very thin ice to encounters with bears. He was prepared for the latter by carrying a knife and a can of bear spray, while for the former, he carefully surveyed the plain, making sure everything was in order with every cautious step. In the event that something were to happen, he would utilize that to secure his own survival in this frigid wilderness. Not long after, he halted to examine the ice. Glaciers of various types blanketed the landscape, but at first sight, they were all very similar. But not these, and he quickly came to understand why. Humans hadn't touched these ancient glacier formations for centuries because of how old they were. Truthfully, this place was seldom visited. Stewart subsequently investigated the ice distribution in the Arctic. The thickness of some sections varied from that of others. Although some were slightly slick, most appeared to be ordinary. Regardless, he made up his mind that he could cross without much trouble, even if something were to surprise him. He didn't believe it would be dangerous at all. He descended the slope to the base and then ascended to the ragged rock shelf he'd seen earlier. He glanced down the steep slope to the opposite side for a brief moment before continuing. Still, he froze in disbelief as he redirected his attention to proceed. Every direction was obstructed by the sharp rocks. Not even the way to the foot of the mountain could be reached. "Great," he murmured, his breath coming in heavy gasps. Stewart started climbing the hill. His heart raced with every step as he felt the ice crunch under his boots. He shuddered uncontrollably due to the freezing air. He pondered the duration required for the chill to claim a life. Stewart came to a sudden halt as he reached the ridge that extended above the lake. Patches of snow covered the sheer cliffs above him, creating an atmosphere reminiscent of a horror film. There was a whole family of polar bears waiting for him, so resting wouldn't help. He has spent his entire career exploring the Arctic Ocean, and he has never encountered anything similar. Historically, polar bears have been known to hibernate in the Arctic until spring. The fact remained, though, that he stood before a swarm of dangerous beasts. I mean, what did he think he could do? At that very moment, Stewart felt his heart race as a few of the bears took note of him. With no time to waste, he started to descend, desperately trying to evade the mother bear and her cubs. On his way to the bottom, he looked up, just to be sure he had survived. The sight of a clear path allowed him to exhale in relief. On the other hand, a growl echoed from somewhere nearby as he advanced. Stewart came to a halt. Before he turned around, could he hear anything? Oh, look at that, it was back. To him, it sounded as though it were directly ahead of him. Then he started to wonder what on earth he had gotten himself into, and one of the bears decided to tag along. In order to assess his environment, he glanced up for an instant. Nearer to his right, he heard another growl. Stewart sprinted to one side, careening down an icy path, without pausing to consider his options. His breath caught in his throat as he heard another growl coming from behind him. He was well aware that there was no way out of this situation. With a gasp, he looked behind him. He was stopped in his tracks by the biggest white bear he had ever seen. It stood only a few feet behind him. The sharp teeth emitted an orange light that shone through the darkness, illuminating the area around it. Stewart felt shivers run down his spine as the animal cocked its head and let out another warning growl. As he stared at the monster in front of him, Stewart did not move a muscle. Curiously, he mustered the bravery to swiftly retrieve the knife and bear spray from his backpack, despite his tense fear. As the bear lunged at him, Stewart unleashed the full fury of the chemical contained in the bear spray, thwarting the deadly attack on his arm. Stewart still managed to hit his mark, even though the claws ripped the bear spray can from his grasp. Bear spray fumes had already reached the animal's nose. The sound of its agonized roar sent it reeling backward. It made several attempts to alleviate the stinging, but to no avail. Seeing an opportunity, Stewart took off running before the bear could get its bearings. Running for his life, he clenched his wounded hand and paid no mind to the condition of the ice below. Further screeches resounded from behind him, A rush of adrenaline propelled Stuart onwards until he dashed to safety, unfazed by the danger. Stuart vowed he would never set foot in the Arctic again.